are thrilled to have you here at our second annual Legal Hackers International Summit. We have folks from all over the world. Raise your hand if you're from a different continent. That's pretty cool. Raise your hand if you run a Legal Hackers chapter somewhere in the world. That's pretty cool. Awesome. So this is the second annual Legal Hackers International Summit. We're here to gather to share information with one another, things that we've learned, our own expertises, but also to get to know one another, because this really is a global community. And not only is it a global community, it's a subset. It's the subset of the global community that's focused on driving growth in legal hackers. It's the subset of the community that's focused on driving growth in legal hackers. I thought I projected, but maybe I'll go over here. And so you all are, hello, Internet. And so you all are leaders, and we're thrilled to have you. We're thrilled to have you all share your experiences, to get to know one another, and then take the lessons that you learn today and tomorrow back to your individual communities and to your various regions of the world. To start things off, just wanted to go through some program notes. So the schedule is today from now until 6 o'clock. We're going to take 2 breaks. I believe we'll take a break for lunch and then a break in the middle of the afternoon. This morning we're going to focus on kind of big think, and then we're going to move into various subject areas. So hacking legal practice. We'll talk about hacking law in general, and then we'll also have a number of workshops in addition to hacking law school. For social media, as all of you know, legal hack is the hashtag. For this conference, for this summit, I encourage you to use Legal Hack 2016. I checked, we are the only people using Legal Hack 2016 in the world. And so, and this is helpful, and it also encourages us to have a Legal Hack 2017, 18, don't want to have 2016 just hanging out there. Legal Hackers is the Twitter handle for legal hackers globally, but each one of you have individual communities. So when speakers are up from different chapters, I encourage you to use not only their own personal Twitter handles, but also the Twitter handles of their local chapters, raising awareness that they're doing amazing things in their community. Wi-Fi, if you turn around, there's the Wi-Fi password. It should work, it should be fast. If you have trouble, then we'll figure it out. And if you look under your seat, I'm just kidding. But I wanted to go through a few ground rules. Obviously, we're all here to share with one another. We have one opportunity each year to come together and to share our experiences and our expertise with one another. And so please be respectful of the speakers. Please give them your undivided attention. If you need to take a break or a phone call or something like that, please go outside, or if it's too hot, which I think it is, go way over there. Because once again, we are broadcasting this, we're recording it. We want to make sure that we keep it for posterity, but also that we show respect to our speakers who've traveled from long ways away to make it here. Another ground rule is something that I've kind of mentioned to a bunch of people, and I think it can be summed up in the mantra, no suits, no lanyards, and no sales pitches. And this is not a sales conference. This is a meeting of friends from around the world. We're here to have meaningful conversations. We're here to share big think things that we've come across in our experiences. And so please don't sell your company. I know that you're building amazing, amazing things, but really the purpose here is to get to the why. Why are you doing these things? What are the passions that are animating you? And how can we take them, all of us, back to our individual experiences, back to our individual communities, and let them bloom there. Finally, thank you to our sponsors. We have Kelley Drye is one of our sponsors, Avvo, and also the Seattle Legal Innovation. Hey, Dan, what's the name of your group again?
I'm giving you money. Do you care?
Dan,
just don't call me late for dinner.
Dan's group will at some point be called Seattle Legal Hackers, but not today. Lawyer Metrics is one of our amazing sponsors. We also have Gomez Pinzon Zuleta and Eris Industries. So thank you all very much for sponsoring. Let's give a round of applause to our sponsors. Phil, anything to?
I'll just add one thing to the welcome. Thank you all so much for doing this, coming here all this way for people who've traveled. This discussion every year is extreme. Sorry, I should talk to the mic. This, what I hope will be an annual discussion of people who are like-minded worldwide, is so important, especially in a time when fear is being spread everywhere. This is a way of discussing and innovating social activism, among other things. So this is a great and responsible place to do that. So thank you so much for joining us and being a part of that. If you need absolutely anything, please just come talk to me. I'm here to help. I will also be the timekeeper today. So I'm going to give you like a 5-minute thing if you're about 5 minutes away from done. So
if they hit the mark, then we just start booing, right?
Right. Yeah, we'll do Apollo rules. Yeah. Okay.
All right.
Thank you, everyone.
So I wanted to quickly talk about what Legal Hackers is. I know many of you consider yourselves legal hackers, run legal hackers, chapters, organizations, and engage in legal hacking. But just to set the table for today's discussion, here is our mission statement. Legal Hackers is a global movement of lawyers, policymakers, technologists, and academics, and I'll add, and anyone else who's interested in exploring and developing creative solutions, some of the most pressing issues at the intersection of law and technology. We're a global movement. We have 42 chapters around the world in various stages, including our first African chapter, which is actually awesome because back in January we all got together and we had a global virtual hangout, and we set a number of goals for ourselves, and one of those was making sure that we had more reach. And Africa was toward the top of our list. And so we're thrilled to have a chapter in Nairobi, Kenya, and we've also been talking to Lagos in Nigeria as well about another chapter. So I think there's going to be really big things. The people there are doing awesome, awesome work, and so we're thrilled to have all of them. So what do we do? Well, at the base level, we host events, but that doesn't really cover it. So let me explain some of the events, and then we'll talk a little bit more conceptually about what we do. So Legal Hackers we host hackathons, we host meetups, we host workshops, we host jam sessions to help people develop their legal hacking projects. Some of our hackathons have been really incredible. I'll take one for example. This was in Washington, D.C. We partnered with the White House, the Department of Education, and 18F, which is the Civic Hacker Corps in the General Services Administration, for Alley Hacks. That's A11Y. It was an accessibility hackathon that was focused on building tools to help people with disabilities access government resources. So it has an open data bent to it. It also has a civic tech aspect to it, and there's actually a hardware aspect to it too. So we had leaders from the disabilities advocacy community from around the world, or from around the country rather, come to Washington, D.C. We had a summit. Vince Cerf gave our keynote, which was unbelievable, blew all of our minds. And then on the right there, that's Megan Smith, who judged all the projects. So she's the US CTO.
Pointing at you, it's good.
So she's the US CTO, worked at Google on Project X forever, and was able to give amazing, amazing feedback to everyone. So a super, super inspiring event. Down below, we have Hack IT for Justice. And I picked this one because it was the most recent. So Arlene, would you mind standing up for everyone? This is Arlene. She put together Hack IT for Justice. Let's give her a round of applause. Legal Hackers Scotland, working together with the Law Society of Scotland, hosted a legal hackathon to address access to justice issues. I encourage all of you to go online. If you search for the Legal Hackers Scotland Twitter handle, you'll find a video that they put together afterwards. It was amazing. Lots of really interesting interviews with people, lots of discussion about what they were building. Really, really incredible stuff. So what do we care about? We care about law practice modernization / automation, open data and open government, access to justice, access to technology, things like disabilities access, for example, and emerging technology. So the Uberization of everything as one example, or blockchain technologies. But in short, it boils down to this idea, that it's the hacker ethic applied to law. So we're going to hear from Dan in just a little bit about the hacker ethic, about early hackers, the MIT Model Railroad Club, and everything that came out of that. But this is kind of all boiled down. And actually, Dan deserves credit for this because he wrote an article in the ABA Journal 2 years ago, Dan? Is that what it was? 2 or 3 years ago on this topic, and really explored this issue and set a lot of the foundation for some of the work that we'd go on to do afterward. But I wanted to make one contribution to the discussion. More conceptually, what is legal hacking? So I was having a conversation with a friend of mine a few weeks ago, and we grew up together. We played in bands together. We were building websites together and all of this. He went the engineering route, I went the law route. And ever since then, we've been having conversations about the intersection of the two. And just the other day, we were talking, and he says to me, I think the problem with legal innovation, or innovation within law and policymaking, is that lawyers and policymakers tend to spend too much of their time in the closed mode. So I thought to myself, what's the closed mode? And I had no idea. And so I asked him, what's the closed mode? And he says to me, well, check out this talk. You can find it online, by this guy, John Cleese. That's John Cleese. Does everyone know who John Cleese is? Okay, cool. So John Cleese was a part of Monty Python, but he also spends a lot of time thinking about psychology and psychology in the business place, and encouraging creativity and encouraging innovation. So he gave this talk, and he differentiated between open and closed modes of thinking. With the open mode of thinking, he says, it's relaxed, it's receptive, it's exploratory, asking the big what-if questions. It's democratic. All ideas are welcome, all people are welcome. It's playful, it's about having fun. And because of that, it also tends to be humorous. It might be absurd at first, but of course many absurd ideas turn into some of the most world-changing ideas. Now the closed mode, on the other hand, is different. It's tight. It's rigid, it's serious, it's hierarchical, it's stuck in its ways, and it's tunnel visioned, right? Many of you might think of what we do in our day-to-day when we're building a startup, or when we're practicing law, right? Or when we're writing that law review article. We're in tunnel vision mode, we're in the closed mode. Now, closed mode is super important for productivity, but it's totally useless for creativity. Open mode is necessary for creative thought because it provides you with an oasis. It provides you with a space within which to explore absurd ideas, crazy ideas, creative ideas, to prototype things, to test things out, to ask the what-if questions. And I'd like to suggest that legal hacking focuses on the open mode. In some senses, it's law in the open mode. Now, legal hackers provides a casual environment. No suits, no lanyards, no sales pitches. It's open to everyone. You don't have to be a lawyer. You don't have to pass a test. You don't even need to be a technologist. It's totally indifferent to what your age is. Right? You can be, and think about the early hackers, or think about even today's hackers, or your favorite bands. When they were at their peak creativity, they were 16 years old or 18 years old, right? They're in their dorm rooms. We don't think about that. I'm, 24 years away, right? 24 years older than Mark Zuckerberg when he started Facebook or whatever it was. 12 years? Forget about it. So anyway, it's passionate, right? We spend a lot of our free time building legal hackers communities, thinking about these ideas, going to conferences, flying around the world to sit in a open, raw space in Brooklyn to talk about this sort of stuff, because we care a lot about it. But we also learn a lot from it. It's creative. It's about producing these ideas. And it's also fun because of that. So, to wrap it up, legal hacking is the process that allows us to take a step back, to identify challenges and opportunities, and to develop creative solutions that promote access to justice, information, and government. Now, of course, the closed mode is still important, because if you want to implement those things, you've got to get tunnel visioned at some point, you've got to get focused. But what we do here is focus on the open mode. Someone is taking a picture. Here you go, John. I got flashed. Not that way. But, so, summit goals. This is pretty self-evident. Everyone knows this. Everyone came here with this, but I thought it'd be nice just to have it on the screen. While you're here, open your thinking, seek out your fellow legal hackers. I encourage everyone in the room to meet everyone in the room. Learn from our amazing speakers. They've come across the world to share their experiences. Share your own thoughts and ideas. Ask great questions. Reflect on your experience, both during it and after it when you go home. Build meaningful relationships. Continue talking to people. I loved the fact that everyone said, oh yeah, I know you from Twitter. Oh yeah, I know you from email or from Skype or from whatever it is. It just so happens that right now, we're all in the same room. And then spread the word. When you go back, if you thought this was meaningful, if you thought it was helpful, if you don't have a legal hackers chapter in your community and you'd like to build one, I encourage you to spread the word, start your own, and get things started. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to our first speaker, Dan, Lear. Thank you.
I want the internet to hear me. Hello, internet. Whoa, that's bright. Okay. All right, so one of the reasons, Jameson, and how much, I got 20 minutes? Yeah. All right. That I resist changing the name of my group, one of them among many, is like you share this word in a civilized discussion, and it's like you've just dropped a Molotov cocktail into the middle of the table. But seriously, like, this is a scary word to a lot of people. And again, my issues with it aside, as someone who spends a lot of my time talking to lawyers, traveling the country, and internationally, I went to Toronto. Yeah, I did. It's a great town. Like, when I say I'm in, like, sometimes I have to say, like, well, that whole legal hackers thing that I do. In fact, I had a recruiter. I used to have hacker on my LinkedIn bio. And before I had, like, formally not been a lawyer anymore, she was like, can you just change that to, like, thinker? But, like, this freaks people out. But I'm Dan, and Jameson, I threw that on there so I wasn't selling, right? I'm Director of Industry Relations for... And I want to talk today about what we can learn from hackers, and particularly what we can learn from the original hackers. There are some really interesting stories, both about the origins of hacker culture, and I think some fantastic stories about sort of what those folks can teach us about how we can go about doing what we do in our awesome groups all the time. So here's what we're going to talk about. First, who are hackers really? Like, let's actually sort of get to the core of this, and then I'll share the lessons with you. So again, like, when I drop that Molotov cocktail in the middle of the table, and I say the word hacker, the word that the image that's conjured up is this one, right? But the original hackers aren't these folks, and actually, they're not even these folks. They are these folks. And you'll actually appreciate this, and maybe some of you have seen my reInvent Law talk where I've talked about this, but I was sharing, you will appreciate, I was talking to a room full of Python developers, okay? And anyone most of you have probably spent a lot of time with software developers. I was sharing this very same presentation, I showed this very same picture, and I had someone come up to me right after I finished, and he said, actually, he didn't even say anything. He's like, your presentation was fine. And then he said, I want you to know, though, that is an English train. So the most important thing that he needed to tell me was, and like that to me just encapsulates this persona, but I digress. The original hackers were actually, the origins of hacker culture came from the Tech Model Railroad Club at MIT. And these folks this is back in the late 50s and early 60s. And I'm going to call them guys, both because that's like a colloquial West Coast thing, but also because they were unfortunately mostly dudes. But the Tech Model Railroad Club was a group of folks who were interested in model railroad. And they loved playing with these things, not as a toy, but to make them do incredibly new and interesting and creative things. They wanted to see how fast they could move them. They wanted to see how many circuits they could implement. They wanted to see how fast they could make it go up or down a hill. For them, it was as much about exploration and trying new things as it was about the trains themselves. And so then, when down the hall from them, huge room-filling combinations of circuits and switches showed up, they were taken with them. They were fascinated. And what I'm talking about are these first early computers. And of course, these computers at the time cost probably what today would be hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars. And they weren't supposed to be toys for people who otherwise would have been playing with model railroad. But they were so passionate about that, about these circuits, about exploring this new frontier, that they would do anything they could just to get their hands on them. They would stay up late at night so that just those few hours when the computer actually wasn't being used, they could use them and try them out and make them do all sorts of crazy things. So it's important to remember that the evolution of hacking looks like this, right? From here to here, come on, to here. This is not working. There we go. To here, to here. But at its core, what I was talking about a minute ago is there's this ethic, right? There's this commitment, not necessarily to stealing other people's stuff and running off to the French Riviera. We were talking about the French Riviera just this morning. But to exploring, to openness, to creativity, to innovation, purely for its sake. In fact, and I'll read a quick quote here. And I'm taking a lot of this from Stephen Levy's book on hackers. If you haven't read it, Hackers, Heroes of the Computer Revolution. It's a great read. But Levy said in that book, hackers believe that essential lessons can be learned from taking things apart, seeing how they work, and using this knowledge to create new and interesting things. This is especially true when, from the hacker's point of view, something is broken and needs improvement. And then Mark Zuckerberg, interestingly, Jameson just talked about Mark Zuckerberg, in his letter to shareholders right before Facebook's IPO, also mentioned hackers. The hacker way is an approach to building that involves continuous improvement and iteration. Hackers believe that something can always be better and that nothing is ever complete, that they just have to go fix it, often in the face of people who say it's impossible or are content with the status quo. So it's this ethic, it's this way of thinking about and looking at the world. And I think that there's some, I'm super excited to share with you guys a few lessons from Stephen Levy's book that I think will hopefully be really applicable for what we do as legal hackers. So lesson number 1, don't confuse process with result, or I like to say this, call this one death to precedent, right? So, I'll come back to that. Let's talk about this for a minute. So one of the early legal hackers who was just fascinated with this computer, he had a math professor who said, you have to do your math homework on one of these old clunky electromechanical calculators. Now, I remember seeing like those typewriters where you'd hit a button and like one of the things would like flip up. I imagine that an electromechanical calculator looks something like that, but is maybe even like more of a torture device. So his math professor said, you have to do your homework on this electromechanical calculator. And he said, that's ridiculous. I have access to this incredibly powerful computer. And so what he did is he went and he wrote a program that basically enabled the computer to mimic the behavior of the electromechanical calculator. And then he did his homework on the computer. And so he did that homework, he took it to the professor, and the professor said, this is worthless. You get no credit. You get a 0. And there are so many lessons, but one that I think is incredibly relevant for us in the legal sector is this notion of precedent, right? You didn't do it the way we've always done it. You didn't do it the way I told you to do it. And I want to talk about legal ed in a minute, but like this just totally boggles my mind as a professor that he could look at what this person had created that is clearly a demonstration, not only that he knew how to get the math done, but of mathematics generally, that you could write a program that shows such a fundamental understanding of how this stuff works, and yet to say this is worthless, it's crazy. It's crazy. So the worst thing we can do, and I think you all understand this, but I think we fight against this as we talk to lawyers and other legal professionals every day, is to start with the status quo, is to think, how have we done this before? Because it's clear in so many ways that that's just broken and not working. All right, lesson number 2. technology is not witchcraft. So there was an early legal hacker who was trying to decide sort of between pursuing, and I think I mentioned this is all at MIT. He was trying to decide whether to major in math, or he was increasingly sort of getting drawn into the orbit of these computer hackers. And he went to his math professor and he said, okay, hey, like, you know, math is really interesting to me, but like there's this new evolving area of computing. And like, I'm kind of into it. What should I do? And the math professor's response was, technology is witchcraft. Computers are witchcraft. Avoid at all costs, right? Well, I think that the fact that the two most valuable companies on the New York Stock Exchange today are, anybody? Apple and Google, that's right. So it's definitely, well, at the very least, it's a very lucrative form of witchcraft. But I think it's proven its value. But more to the point, right? Thinking about legal. Again, like, I tell people I'm a hacker and it scares the crap out of them. But also, like, even when I do explain what I'm doing, for example, I don't know if many of you use the Twitters. I was on Twitter just yesterday in a pseudo argument with some people about whether lawyers should learn to code. And I agree that there are lots of reasons why they shouldn't, but I think just the simple exercise of understanding why they should, understanding why this matters, understanding why we should think that through. And yeah, like, in a lot of ways, economically, it's incredibly inefficient. And I'm totally willing to have that conversation, but what I'm sick of and what I hope that we can continue in our groups to push against is this just knee-jerk reaction of like, no, that's wrong, or no, that's crazy, or that doesn't make any sense. It's not witchcraft. Number 3. So part of the early legal hacker ethic, if you will, part of this early spirit that developed was something called the hands-on ethic. Hands-on imperative. Thank you. We were talking about this, Jameson, the hands-on imperative. And that was basically it was this, JFDI, right? If you guys know that acronym, just do it with some other colorful language inserted. Stop talking about what you might do, stop thinking about it, and just get your hands on the machine, right? They had access to these computers, is the hands-on imperative. We want to work with these things. We want to get our hands dirty. We want to understand how this stuff works by exploring it. So one of my favorite stories, again, from the early hackers. So Adam Silver sort of was another legal hacker that found his way into the orbit of these MIT computer enthusiasts. And he started building little robots, actually. And this is pretty early. This is like back in the early to mid 60s. He started building little robots that could perform simple little tasks like this one, where if you dropped your wallet on the floor, the robot would scoot across the floor and it had a little pen and it would pick up the wallet and like scoot it over to the side of the room. So it didn't help that Adam was like a 16-year-old high school dropout who wasn't even enrolled at MIT. But what he was doing with these robots drove some of the hackers' neighbors crazy. So just a floor or two above them were the AI theorists, right? The artificial intelligence theorists. And they, at the time, were sitting there up in their ivory tower, 2 floors above the computer nerds, saying, basically, all of the stuff that you're doing with that robot, it can't be done. So he was physically demonstrating to them that all of the things that they were writing their dissertations about were bunk. So many times when I talk to lawyers about what we can do with technology, so many times when I talk to them about the promises of collaborative effort and openness, they say no, and they, so many of us know, they start issue spotting, they start troubleshooting, they start telling us about how stupid an idea this is. And it reminds me of actually a lawyer friend of mine who started a company in Silicon Valley. We were having this conversation about sort of just this notion of like getting started, and he said, so many people come to me with pitches these days about like, hey, should I do a company to do this? And he said, I don't even know what's a good idea anymore. My answer to them is, go find an engineer and do it. And so, again, if there's anything we can push in our groups, if there's anything that we can do to change the way we think about this, it's that just start doing stuff. Just get started. When I think about when I started my group in Seattle, it was me and another woman, and truly we said, maybe there'll be two of us in a coffee shop talking about this stuff, but at least we'll be there, and at least we'll be there having those conversations. So just get started. It's that hands-on imperative. It's true, guys. Said another way, all of you plus hackers equals goodness. So, in conclusion, right, we know, and we need to tell the world, that this dominant paradigm of hackers, it's certainly, hopefully not the most important one, and it's certainly not the only story. And in fact, if we can, what we need to do is we need to embrace our inner hacker. We need to understand them. We need to love them, even. Because it's funny, we were just before we were starting here talking about the growth of this movement, the growth of legal hackers. And one meetup, Phil and I were just talking about it, one meetup, 4 years ago with 20 people about mobile privacy has turned into truly a global movement with thousands of members and over 40 chapters. And I think it's not only because this is a fantastic idea, or it's not only because these people have worked so hard, Phil, Jameson, everybody in this room, but it's also because this is the time, this is the place, now is the opportunity. We have the technology, we have the connections that we're building here between all of us to really change the fundamental way we think about law for good, because law is an amazing and powerful tool, but change it for good so that it serves not only those of us in our room, not only those of us in our groups, but all of us in society. So thanks so much, and I'm looking forward to chatting with you about the rest.
Next up, everyone, is Allan from MindHive. Hey, Scott, while you're setting up, can I tell that Scott Allan? Okay.
So I practice technology law and telecom law, and as a part of that, I go to sales conferences with suits and lanyards and these sorts of things. And so I was at one for the mobile resale industry in Dallas, Texas, and was giving a talk probably about regulatory issues or like the Lifeline program at the FCC, something along those lines. And after the talk, I went down and was walking around, and I saw Scott, who'd given a talk earlier, and it was awesome, and it was flashy, and lots of slides, and lots of cats in the slides. But anyway, it was amazing. And I walked up and said, hey, I really, really liked your presentation. And he goes, you're a lawyer. I go, what do you mean? He goes, you're the only guy in here wearing a suit. And I was like, I am the only guy in here wearing a suit. And then he goes, tell you what, my favorite word is the word pettifogger. Who knows the word pettifogger? Raise your hand. Only because of yesterday. Only because of yesterday. I didn't know the word pettifogger. I said, Scott, if I look up the word pettifogger, am I going to be insulted? And he goes, I don't know. And at that point, I said, well, let me tell you something. There's this group called Legal Hackers that we're trying to build. We bring together lawyers and technologists, try to create a lingua franca between the two of them. He says, that sounds cool. And we've been friends ever since. Anyway, this is Scott Allan.
Thanks, Jameson. So I'm Scott Allan. I'm going to give you a perspective about opportunities in legal hacking. First of all, I want to say thank you to Phil and Jameson for doing this. I mean, it's amazing. It's really exciting. It's super cool. And I describe my involvement with legal hackers as sort of Jameson talked me into founding Legal Hackers Toronto. So, but I'm glad that he did. And we've had one event, and it was basically me creating a meetup group. That was the extent of the promotion. Actually, I emailed a few lawyers that I knew, like 3 people really. and we had 30 people show up, and I was overwhelmed by the turnout, the quality of the people. I couldn't speak to everybody, and it was just all very exciting. And anyway, so I'm grateful to Jameson and Phil and for all of you for coming and for the opportunity to speak today. So thank you very much. Before I get started, actually, they say when you're giving a presentation, it's good to know your audience. So I'm going to ask you to self-identify into one of two groups, either a lawyer or a hacker. Okay, so let's pretend you're at immigration control, and you have to go into one of two lines. If you would go into the hacker line, could you please stand up? All right, wonderful. Thank you, hackers. Good to see you. Congratulations. Welcome. Okay, we'll let you into the country. And then if you were going into the lawyer line, could you please stand up? Oh my God, there are so many fucking lawyers here. Oh no, I need to say sit down. Keep standing up. Keep standing up. So I did a slide especially for in case this was going to happen. So this slide is just for the lawyers. It's the terms and conditions of my presentation. No, you have to stay back. And if you accept these terms and conditions, I will continue with my presentation and you can sit down. But if you don't accept them, just stay standing up. All right, great, thank you. Yeah. There's no modifications allowed, right? So yeah, the point is, oftentimes the way law is implemented is not particularly user-friendly. You're always accepting these terms and conditions, these user agreements that you don't get a chance to review. So I'm from Canada. You'll probably be able to tell by the wacky slides, the mildly Commonwealth sense of humor, and making fun of my American friends. We also have, I want to introduce two other Canadians that are here. So Joanna, please stand up, and Raja, please stand up. They are members of the Toronto Executive, and please engage them. Raja, can you show your socks, please, as well? If you can lift your leg up. He's wearing Canada socks there, so that is great. We'd like to represent, yeah. I'm going to tell you a little bit quickly about myself. This isn't a sales job. I sort of was very lucky. I came of age in 1994, around the time the internet sort of took off. So if I was born at a different time, I might have been really involved in the railroad or whatever was happening. But I was lucky. The first company I was involved in was the first internet service provider, internet-only service provider in Canada. I've gone and done some other things, lots of open source development. OpenSRS was one of the first registrars in the domain name space that went from 0 to 30% in 12 months, got rid of the monopoly that Network Solutions, if anyone knows what that was. Message Labs was a technology company. I was part of the American executive team. It ultimately sold to Symantec for $700 million or something like that. Ping, these are my ing years. So Ping is an Evite killer that I was involved with. And then my last real job was at a company called Ting, which is a wireless service provider here in America. And now I'm into the MindHive and Casemon phase of my career, which I'm not going to say anything about. So what I want to tell you is I have some experience with technology and the internet. And I've lived in New York a few times, and about 8 years ago, I was here and I was doing some consulting for fashion companies. And it was interesting to me, there was this whole thing about Fashion 2.0, and a lot of the big brands were coming online, and you had Net-a-Porter and all this sort of thing. And I was like scratching my head and thinking, this is so weird. It's like it's 1994 again, except for fashion. And they were all excited and getting websites and doing e-commerce and all that sort of thing. And it became this, there was innovation that happened and this big thing. But to me, I was kind of like, who knew that not everybody and everything was online? So the point of this story is when I looked at what Jameson was doing with legal hackers, or what you're all doing with legal hackers, I sort of had this realization that, law and government are kind of like the last two vestiges that haven't come online in a serious and significant way, haven't been hacked, haven't been innovated and made better through the power of the internet. And so I want to stress to you that you guys are in an awesome position. This is like seriously a land grab. It's the opening of the West. You're all super well positioned to do amazing things and transform the world. From my perspective, it's very early days. So here's the part of the presentation, and by the way, there's a theme to my presentation. You may pick up on it, you may not. So here's the part of the presentation where I'm just going to tell you some things that I think that you might want to know as you go out and innovate through government or through companies and technologies or law firms or whatever. The first few things I'm going to tell you are about product management. I've developed a lot of products. I have some experience with that. And so I think, when I talk to lawyers about their ideas for products, they often have certain biases, and I've made lots of mistakes in developing products. So here are a few things about products that I think would be helpful to anybody. So first of all, if you're developing a technology product, it might be good to have somebody who knows something about technology involved. Now, you would think that would be basic, but it's often not. And I liken it to opening a restaurant without a chef involved in the ownership position. Technology is not witchcraft, but the difference between a weekend coder or a casual coder and some of the best guys that I've worked with, it's like a factor of 10 in terms of productivity, in terms of ability to execute. So, as mind-numbingly obvious as this might be, I would counsel you to get a nerd involved. The second thing I would say, and this is important, and I say this all the time, I do a lot of work with startups and talking to entrepreneurs, set your expectations low. Keep them rational. It's super, super easy to get excited and be like, oh my God, we are going to take over the world. We are so close to crushing it. And these guys want to give us $1 million. It's never that easy. It is never that easy. And if someone's offering you $1 million for your little idea, you're probably about to get hosed. It's the number of startups that I have seen fail, and remember, most startups are going to fail, as a result of selling their investors the wrong expectations, setting the wrong expectations themselves, telling their staff, their customers. It's one of the biggest mistakes you can make. Keep your expectations reasonable and rational. This is another good product one. And again, a lot of what I'm going to say is going to be obvious. But listen to your customers. It is, again, something that I've seen a number of times where people have an idea about how to do something, and their customers are telling them not to do it this way. And they're like, but this is the better way. This is how it should be done. You're wrong, customer. And then they're out of business. So listening to your customers is absolutely crucial. It's one of the things that I have, by accident, done my entire career. And I often find myself fighting with other people in the company to represent or advocate for the customer because it's kind of important. So that is another piece of advice for you. We almost had the same slide. Evolution is a theme here. So your idea, your concept is going to need to evolve. It's super important that you aren't committed to a particular approach. Every successful business I've been involved in has evolved significantly, especially closer to the start. You come up with something in the back of a napkin and a couple friends tell you it's a good idea. When you get out to the market and it's amazing how wrong you can be and how important it is to listen to your customers and evolve your idea. So I would say you always want to evolve your idea and approach, but especially at first, be super open to pivoting and focusing. Sometimes I've had ideas that barely resemble the original pitch by the time we get to market, and they end up being super successful because you've had the flexibility to go where the ball is. This is probably the hardest slide for me to do. This is ship is the point of this slide. So I think it was Steve Jobs who said, real artists ship. And I think there was this, I know, it's a terrible joke, it's a terrible slide. I'd like to, as a Canadian, we always apologize. I'm apologizing for the slide right now. But yeah, ship. Don't get stuck as a guy, Joel Spolsky from Joel and Software. He's like an architecture, information architect astronaut, where you spend all your time in the cloud, you never actually develop anything or ship anything. Get it out there. It's a theme from the earlier presentation as well. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about the second part of things that I know about, which is money. So you're going to do a startup. You're probably going to need some money. My advice is to take as little money as possible ever and retain as much control as you can. If you have to take money, or if you want to take money, then it's super important who you take money from. And you're partnering with these people, so I want you to think about a partnership, a marriage. Do you trust these people? Do you like these people? Do you feel, and you understand that VCs do this for a living. They eat and digest and spit out startups for a living, whereas for you this might be your dream. Or super important to you. They're going to have a different cycle. Even investors, family and friends, it's very important that you understand when you take their money that you're now married to them, and it's an important relationship. And just my advice is to be very careful about that and really think about it more than the money, more than necessarily the hookups, but the people. And always look at the leadership. There's a thing about VCs is they want you to do one of two things. They want you to fucking fail immediately or be a unicorn. So if you want to build a business that's nice, $100 million business over 5 years, don't take any VC money because they won't like that. They will try and crush you out of the market or make you something bigger, faster. It's a reality. It's not a knock on VCs. They're awesome for certain types of things. And they do give a lot of money to a lot of ideas that probably don't deserve it. But understand that that's what a lot of technology investors do, is bet on 100 companies and expect 99 to fail. When it comes to money, measure twice and cut once. The worst time to raise money is when you have no money. Also, remember you're going to fail. All success comes out of failure, and it's just the truth. Most startups will fail. Whenever I start a new project, I early on learned to assume it's probably not going to work out. And it's a good mentality. You're not projecting like, oh, this thing is going to fail, it's doomed, why are we doing it? But it's a back-of-the-mind thing that you keep in your head that you sort of say, you know what, I'm prepared for this, or this is an option. I may not be the next Facebook, because the odds are you're not going to be the next Facebook. And the last slide is working with others. So work with other startups, work with other people, share your ideas. I always love it when you meet people and they're like, I can't tell you what my idea is, it's secret. There's no such thing as an original idea. It's very few secretive things that we're going to be working on in law and technology. And the more people you talk to, the more feedback you get, the more innovation, evolution you're going to get, the better off you're going to be. So I thank you all for this presentation, for this time, and I look forward to meeting you.
Thanks, Jameson. So my instincts were right. I did not have to write a talk today. And my instincts were right for a couple of reasons. First of all, I was pretty sure that between Phil and Jameson and Dan and Scott, they were going to have the most wonderful content and the most inspiring talks to get us going. So I'm not going to give a motivational discussion. The other reason I knew I didn't have to write anything or think about what I was going to say is because we are in 20J Street. I think they call this 30 John, but it's 20J. Right upstairs, about 10 years ago, a company was formed called Outside In. Does anyone remember Outside In? A Couple. All right. The important thing about it, it's irrelevant what Outside In did or what it was. It was one of the early hyper-local sites. But its CEO was a younger Steve Johnson. Anyone remember who knows Steve and Johnson is? Well, what's relevant is he's a big internet philosopher, and among other things, he wrote a book called Where Good Ideas Come From. And in that book, he talked about something called the adjacent possible. And the concept of the adjacent, he didn't start the term, but he really spread it widely. Who's heard of the term the adjacent possible? A lot of folks in this room. This is a rare room, a beautiful, rare room. For those of you who don't know the term the adjacent possible, it essentially says, at least the way I interpret it, it says that you don't know what the next great idea is going to be, but you know it's going to happen when you bring in brilliant people from diverse backgrounds, diverse experiences, diverse talents, and you shove them in a room together. And that's what we have here today, I think, although it would have been nice to have a few more technologists and not so many people who self-identified as lawyers. But for me, that's the main concept, is that we don't know what the next iteration is going to be, what the next great idea is, but we know it's going to happen when you bring the right people together. Now, I say that in a way to give some historical context for where I think we are today. I started teaching about 9 years ago. And the truth of the matter is I was primarily a lawyer and a new academic. The most conservative people in the world are either lawyers or academics. So I was essentially living in this community of incredibly status quo frightened people who loved their existence. Law hadn't changed for 500 years. Academia hadn't changed for 500 years. This is the way it's going to be. This is the way it should be forever. And I came in with a slightly different perspective. I had been working with a lot of startups. Scott, and actually I want to point to something that Dan said. Dan said a very scary phrase. He said, "It can't be done." That was the devastating concept that every expert would tell us. It can't be done. Don't deploy AI robots. It can't be done. Don't deploy new technology in this way. It can't be done. I learned the concept by fire. I was one of the lawyers who helped to incubate a company called Vonage. Now, Vonage hasn't been a great success, but it had mild success, some degree of success. The one thing I really learned from Vonage is that when you want to build a disruptive company, don't only take people within that industry. So when we built Vonage, we didn't go to Verizon, we didn't go to AT&T, we didn't go to the phone industry. We went to Wall Street. We went to market makers. We went to people who knew how to create new markets, and they said, well, when we went to Verizon, the Verizon folks, the predecessors to Verizon, said, it can't be done. You can't build a phone company on the internet like this. We have this method. This is how it's done. So we said, screw you. We're not going to you. We're going to Wall Street. And we went to the people who said, you know what? We've done similar things in other sectors. We can do it to telephony. So that's what we did. We went to the people who said, you know what? It can be done. So I brought that spirit, at least in my head, over to Brooklyn Law School. And the one thing I tried to do from the get-go was to get the students to stop thinking like lawyers, to undo, now some of it was good learning, but some of it was backward-thinking learning, the learning that they had done in their first year of law school. This is how property law works, this is how criminal law works, this is how contract law works. So I made my students, I gave them credit to go out into the world and mingle among the technologists and the innovators. We spent so much time in this building alone. In this building alone, there must have been, at the time, 200 startups. There's probably 1,000 startups in this building alone. And we baked ourselves in this community. Now, we also went to a lot of hackathons. 8 years ago, 9 years ago, none of my colleagues knew what a hackathon was. They didn't know what a hacker was, except that they were people that were destroying the world. So when I said we were going to bring students to hackathons, they thought I was doing something nefarious, and they thought I was mistraining, miseducating what the lawyer of tomorrow should be. We are supposed to be the maintainers of the status quo, the maintainers of law, the maintainers of order. And if we go and participate and play with the hackers, we are encouraging unlawful behavior, too much disruption that might undermine the law and civic process. But we did it anyway. And frankly, I got to say, from the get-go, we were complete outsiders. We would go Friday night to the hackathon and hear the ideas, and we'd brainstorm on the policy implications, et cetera, but we weren't really engaged. 47 hours later, as we were either standing around the room or going out for coffee or going about our normal weekend activities, we'd come back, not really coding, not really participating, and we would hear 47 hours later the miracle that the folks in the room, the hackers, had produced in that brief period of time. And then we'd throw water on the flames of innovation. We'd say, you didn't protect your IP, you didn't divvy up your equity, you didn't figure out any of the relations. It can't be done. You didn't sign NDA. We basically stopped everyone dead in their tracks. They thought they were doing something wonderful. They thought they were going to move on and create this great. And that was horrible, not just for them, but certainly for me and for the students who were trying to engage and really committed in some manner to promote innovation. So we started toying with the idea, how do we make lawyers think more like hackers? How do we play a more vital role? How do we participate in this? Frankly, we are a necessary constituent. The thing that I think most lawyers and most academics forget is that after every single revolution, it was those with legal training who had to reorder society. That's what we forget. We forget that lawyers are revolutionaries, or at least post-revolutionaries. When I look back at the great moments in American history, I think of 4 or 5 of them. I think of right after the American Revolution, who had to write the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, all of the initial statutes and rules to govern our new experiment in democracy. It was those with legal training, and in particular young people with legal training, not the old line folks who perpetuated the status quo. After the American Civil War, same thing. It was the lawyers who had to step in and implement the new amendments, the new equality amendments. The New Deal. Who did FDR tap to come to Washington, D.C.? It was the young lawyers, the young, innovative, agile lawyers to create new rules of the road for a new equitable society. After the Civil Rights Act, it was the young lawyers that Johnson brought in to rewrite the American rules. And now, digital revolution. We are living through a moment in time that I think is more radical than anything that has come before it. So I think of what Scott's slide was. Scott, I love that slide. I got to swipe it somehow. It's the evolutionary timeline, leading up to Donald Trump, God forbid. But the missing link between evolution and Donald Trump was a backward-looking person. Now, when I think of myself and I look around the folks in this room, it's a rare moment. I don't know when it happened, but I all of a sudden became one of the older people in any room. That sucks for many reasons. But when I look at that timeline, I realize I hope I'm close to that, the right side of that evolutionary timeline, but I know I'm not that. What I am, and what I think the older legal academics in this room probably are, is something that just precedes that last human on that timeline. And I look around the room, I think most of you are pretty close to that last link in the evolutionary chain. So what I think of myself as is sort of the father, one of the parents of the child who is frankly part of another species that first invented fire or first invented language. I couldn't do it myself, but I helped breed it. And that's what I think is going on now. I think, 10 years ago when we first tried some legal hacks, they were very, very rudimentary. All we did really was steal ideas from other industries that had used technology to disrupt that sector. And we tried to apply it to law and legal process. We've launched something called the Global Legal Technology Laboratory with an eye towards really transforming globally law and technology by bridging law schools and technology programs and tech industry folks. And a lot of the ideas that I heard a couple months ago up at MIT as this legal technology laboratory was being launched were things that I thought, crap, we have come so far in 10 years. Am I truly the missing link? Am I from a prior species that really is incapable of embracing and figuring out my role in developing these new technologies? And that's a scary proposition. So for me, and I think for everyone in this room, whether you're a seasoned, Luddite attorney or a newfangled technologist exploring legal concepts, you got to figure out your role. And there always is a role. So when I first started teaching, all of my students, I think my first semester, had engineering degrees. And now, 10 years later, I would say 80% of my students come from humanities and social sciences. Because there's a recognition among all lawyers now, all burgeoning lawyers, that if they want to play in this world, they've got to learn it and they've got to get rid of the fear of participating with newfangled digital technology. You know, frankly, I look at Tony over here as sort of the poster child of this. Tony is a very seasoned academic and a very seasoned entrepreneurial lawyer, almost no background in technology. To watch Tony's growth, and Tony's going to talk later, Tony's growth as someone who has, frankly, probably less knowledge than I have about technology. I'm a little bit of a fraud in technology as well. But to watch over the past couple of years as Tony has brought to bear technology on the evolution of legal process in Kansas City has been sort of enlightening to me, and it makes me realize that no matter how steep you are in technology, there is a role, and an important role, for you to be a leader, a project manager, and to train the next generation. I think that's all I need to say or care to say at this point, but I'm confident that this is going to turn into a very lively, dynamic discussion without just, you know, a pundit standing up in the front of the room and, you know, talking at people. Remember, this is where great ideas come from. We're all brilliant in our own unique way, and we've all got to sort of impose our shared knowledge on everyone else here. Thanks.
Great. Hi. So we've heard what hacking is. So it's fixing things, creating things, making things. And I'm here to talk about this very old book. I'm actually going to do a little bit of a reading from it at the end. It's by Charles Dickens, and he does not create nor make nor fix anything. What he does is talk about the problems that exist. And does that have a value? I think it does, because when hackers are making and fixing and creating, they need to also think about why they're doing it, how and why they're going to do it, and the tools that they're going to employ to do it. And perhaps not all of them are going to involve computers. I think that there is a space for hackers to enter into public discourse as well in order to be involved with reforms of our legal systems. My name is Elizabeth Fitzgerald. I'm a co-founder of the Dublin chapter with Gavin Sheridan. I'm a technology lawyer. I'm also a member of the Technology Committee of the Law Society of Ireland, but just to make clear, I'm not representing them at this talk. I have to get that housekeeping out of the way. So it might be somewhat anachronistic to come here and talk to you about a novel that was written between 1852 and 1853, when we were here with a conference about hackers, which is fresh and new and futurism and everything like that. But I think that there's two reasons why it's good to speak about this particular book, and that is that we have a customer voice here. And the customer voice of Dickens is a very angry, irritated, and informed consumer of legal services. And the second reason why I think it's a good reason to talk about this is that legal reform is part of our story. And there was a huge amount of legal reform going on at the time that this book was written in 1852 and 1853. It was written in a context where huge changes were going on in the legal system in England. And I think we might be able to draw some parallels as to the change that is happening now versus what happened when Dickens was writing his story. So this informed and irritated consumer, well, first I'm going to do a little summary of the novel for, actually, who here has read this book? Okay, I haven't finished it. Just disclaimer at the very beginning. Every time I read the first 2 pages of this, I nearly, it's a stab into the heart of every lawyer, because it is a caricature of the effect of what a really bad legal system can do to the society around it. And it hurts to read it. It really does. So it's about a dispute over a will in a case called Jarndyce and Jarndyce, which you may have heard. So it goes on for a very long time. The case, as far as, it's a bit of a spoiler, I don't think you ever really find out what the merits of the case are. It's kind of in the background to the whole story. It goes on for a very long time. So to explain that, Charles Dickens used that innumerable children were born into the cause. A young plaintiff or defendant promised a rocking horse on the settlement of Jarndyce and Jarndyce, grew up, possessed himself of a real horse, and trotted into the afterlife, and the case is still going on. So swift access to justice is an issue in 1852 and 1853. But I ask you, is it an issue right now for you in your legal systems? I'm by no means representative of Ireland, but one case that is in the news in Ireland recently started in the year 2000 and has just reached the end of its litigious road. It could still go to the Supreme Court, but that's 16 years. That's a really good chunk of someone's legal career. And long cases do happen, just as they happen in the time of this particular story. So Dickens, why would he be the person who you wanted to have talking about, reform of your legal system? At age 10, his father was thrown into debtor's prison because being imprisoned for non-payment of a debt was a big feature of the English legal system at the time. So he had to go and work at a factory. At age 15, he became a law clerk. At age 16, he became a court reporter, and he did that for the next few years before he published his first work at age 23 and became pretty much an overnight success. So he knew a lot about the legal system. When later on in his career, you might know the book A Christmas Carol, the famous one with Scrooge, someone stole that, so there was a copyright dispute. And he took a case against them. It took a really, really long time to resolve it. He won, but the payment that he won didn't pay his legal costs. So he was really annoyed. He just really hated the legal system. And when there was another copyright dispute came up, he wrote a letter to his solicitor and said, I would rather suffer any injustice rather than have the injustice of recourse to the law. And he actually wrote that phrase, and that phrase is the very end of the bit that I'm going to read out to you here. So that phrase means an awful lot to him. He really, really felt that the legal system was letting him down. Now, he has a perspective here, the customer voice, and I'm going to talk about two aspects of that perspective, which is the time and space. And those things allow us to, I suppose, it's very interesting because customer voice is part of all design theories. So the last person who's speaking, that you need to listen to your customers, that is so true. And if we listen to Dickens, then we can still hear a customer's voice and apply that to our legal systems right now. Because most of the grievances that he has here, they still apply, I think, to the current law. So I'm going to do the spatial context, and it has the most famous opening sentence in the book, although there's a big dispute about whether it's a sentence or not, and that's London. Just one word with a full stop. So here is London at the time. I've put some stars on it. His second sentence talks about the judge sitting right here in his court, so right in the very centre. And then he pulls the reader out again, and he brings them on a big, mad, sweeping arc all the way around London. Just to see the effect or what's going on in society at the time, which is really great. So he doesn't just stay in the courts, he goes around and sees everything that's going on. So he brings you on a big circle all the way around, and you can see the citizens struggling in mud and mire and cold and bad weather. And the big motif, of course, of Bleak House, of this opening, really famous opening of a novel, is fog. And he just talks about the fog is just infiltrating everywhere. And of course, the fog is the legal system. And he brings you up the river here, and he brings us down to close to the sea down there on the right. And you might think that the fog is coming from there, but no, the fog is not coming there. The fog is emanating from the very centre of this picture, from the Court of Chancery, which is where the case is set. And this particular building right here is the one where the fog seems to be coming from. And if you see at the top there's a lantern. And this is, of course, a lantern is something that should emit light to help people navigate through the dark. This particular lantern is an architectural lantern, so it's to take light in from the outside to light the court. Well, the court is what was inside there, but it's not functioning. So instead of distributing light or allowing society to come in and infiltrate the court system, it's instead just emanating a fog that is distributing penury, injustice, and lots of hefty legal fees all the way around London. So this is the centre. This is Lincoln's Inn right here. He also makes mention of Temple Bar. And Temple Bar, and Chris can't resist a little jump to Magna Carta here, because Temple Bar is down here, and it was the old entrance to the City of London. And in Magna Carta, I think there's 3 clauses of Magna Carta that are still on the statute books in England and Wales. And one of those gives the City of London Corporation the power to look after its own affairs. So we're talking about a document that is 600 years old. At the time of writing Bleak House, only a small bit of it had been repealed. The major repeal happened 10 years after this book. So you have this legal document, 600 years old, is still a big part of the legal system in England and Wales. So that brings us to the temporal context. And I think I need to say a little bit here, because when I read it out, you're going to be hearing the Court of Chancery and the word equity a lot. Equity, it's a type of law that came from a royal a royal power. So when the common law, which was supposed to reflect the customs of the time, didn't work very well, you could make a petition to the king to do a bit of relief for you. After Magna Carta, this guy, who was involved in the last and biggest version of Magna Carta, he didn't really enjoy sitting beside his chancellor and listening to the pleas of his subjects. So in the first bit of legal process outsourcing, he set up the full court of chancery where he didn't have to sit and listen to all the disputes. And then it goes on. Through centuries and centuries, we have this court of chancery going on. And I got special permission from the masters of the bench of the inner temple to show you this particular. They also still exist, but they were very nice to me, so I shouldn't make fun of them. But this is wonderful. So we've got their crimson robes, and we've got their horsehair and goat hair wigs in 1460, which you'll hear a reflection of later on in my book. And here we go on to 1732. Despite the invention of perspective, it still looks pretty much the same. We've got lots of wigs hanging around. This is the well here at the front. We get to have some dogs in the courtroom, which I think is something that should not have changed, but not everyone might agree with me. And then in 1808, so about 30 or 40 years before Bleak House, this is what it looks like. And we have a woman, which is amazing. So not too much change over the centuries. So the reform took decades. It really had started before Charles Dickens wrote this book. So in effect, he was piggybacking a little upon the reform that was already underway. But it ended in this merge of equity, which means fairness and common law. And so the judges had the power to do both things. And one of the reasons of the inefficiencies of the court was you took a case in the common law courts and then you didn't like the answer, so you went to the equity chancery courts. So you could bounce a case back and forth between all of them for ages. And Charles Dickens said at the time of writing there was cases that had started in the previous century that were still ongoing in 1853. So we have, Lennon said that there are decades where nothing happens and weeks where decades happen. And I think in a political context in Europe right now, we're having one of those weeks. But to transmit that into a rather unflattering legal context, there are centuries where nothing happens and decades where something happens. And I think that we're in one of these decades right now. Big changes going on. While I think that the book Bleak House had an impact on the reform that was going on at the time in 1852 and 1853, there were loads of other factors. So there was activist lawyers, there was politicians who were very interested, and then that comment about lawyers being post-revolutionaries, this was written just after the Industrial Revolution had ended. So it was really reflecting a new legal order, a new societal order. And I think that we've got that again now. But what's funny about the information revolution that's happening now is not only is the legal change that is occurring incidental to the huge changes in the distribution of goods, services, the proliferation of information, and the knowledge economy, it's also a necessary result of the tools that are created by the information revolution. The computer is absolutely essential to the life and work of a lawyer. And just like the spinning jenny had a big effect on the Industrial Revolution, the computer is going to affect law hugely. So we've had a customer voice and the reforms in the context of the time. Reading the first 2 pages of this, which I'm going to do right now, gives me huge fire and motivation to think about what effect our legal system has on the people that we practice with and the society that we practice with. And I hope that here's to hacking our legal systems so that instead of being a fog that sort of stymies society, that we become a light that will assist our well-functioning, diverse democracies and legal systems. So now I'm going to give you the first 2 pages. Let me put this back up here. Chapter 1, in Chancery. London, Michaelmas term lately over, and the Lord Chancellor sitting in Lincoln's Inn Hall. Implacable November weather. As much mud in the streets as if the waters had but newly retired from the earth, and would it not be wonderful to meet a megalosaurus 40 feet long or so, waddling like an elephantine lizard up Holborn Hill. Smoke lowering down from chimney pots, making a soft back drizzle, with flakes of soot in it as big as full-grown snowflakes, gone into mourning, one might imagine, for the death of the sun. Dogs, undistinguishable in mire. Horses, scarcely better, splashed to their very blinkers. Foot passengers jostling one another's umbrellas in a general infection of ill temper and losing their foothold at street corners, where tens of thousands of other foot passengers have been slipping and sliding since the day broke, if this day ever broke, adding new deposits to the crust upon crust of mud, sticking at those points tenaciously to the pavement and accumulating at compound interest. Fog everywhere. Fog up the river where it flows among green aights and meadows, fog down the river where it rolls defiles amongst the tiers of shipping and the waterside pollutions of a great and dirty city. Fog on the Essex marshes, fog on the Kentish heights, fog creeping into the cabooses of collier brigs, fog lying out in the yards and hovering in the rigs of great ships, fog drooping on the gunwales of barges and small boats, fog in the eyes and ears of great ancient Greenwich pensioners wheezing by the firesides of their wards, fog in the stem and bowl of the afternoon pipe of the wrathful skipper down in his close cabin, fog cruelly pinching the toes and fingers of his shivering little prentice boy on deck, fog, choice people on the bridges peeping over the parapets into a nether sky of fog, with fog all around them as if they were up in a balloon and hanging in the misty clouds. Gas looming through the fog in diverse places in the streets, much as the sun may from the spongy fields be seen to loom by husbandman and ploughboy. Much of the shops lighted 2 hours before their time, as the gas seems to know, for it has a haggard and unwilling look. The raw afternoon is rawest, and the dense fog is densest, and the muddy streets are muddiest, near that leaden-headed old obstruction, appropriate ornament for the threshold of a leaden-headed old corporation, Temple Bar. And hard by Temple Bar, in Lincoln's Inn Hall, at the very heart of the fog, sits the Lord High Chancellor in his High Court of Chancery. Never can there come fog too thick, never can there come mud and mire too deep to assort with the groping and floundering condition which this High Court of Chancery, most pestilent of hoary sinners, holds this day in the sight of heaven and earth. On such an afternoon, if ever, the Lord High Chancellor ought to be sitting here, as here he is, with a foggy glory round his head, softly fenced in with crimson cloth and curtains, addressed by a large advocate with great whiskers, a little voice, and an interminable brief, and outwardly directing his contemplation to the lantern in the roof, where he can see nothing but fog. On such an afternoon, some score of members of the High Court of Chancery Bar ought to be, as here they are, mistily engaged in one of the 10,000 stages of an endless cause, tripping one another up on slippery precedents, groping knee-deep in technicalities, running their goat hair and horsehair warded heads against walls of words and making a pretense of equity with serious places as payers might. On such an afternoon, the various solicitors in the cause, some 2 or 3 of whom have inherited it from their fathers, who made a fortune by it, ought to be, as are they not, ranged in a line in a long matted well, but you might look in vain for truth at the bottom of it, between the registrar's red table and the silk gowns, with bills, cross-bills, answers, rejoinders, injunctions, affidavits, issues, references to masters' reports, mountains of costly nonsense piled before them. Well may the court be dim with wasting candles here and there, well may the fog hang heavy in it as if it would never get out, well may the stained glass windows lose their colour and admit no light of day into the place. Well may the uninitiated from the streets who peep in through the glass panes in the door be deterred from entrance by its owlish aspect, and by the drawl languidly echoing to the roof from the padded dais where the Lord High Chancellor looks into the lantern that has no light in it, and where the attendant wigs are all stuck in a fog bank. This is the Court of Chancery, which has its decaying houses and its blighted lands in every shire, which has its worn-out lunatic in every madhouse, and its dead in every churchyard, which has its ruined suitor with his slipshod heels and threadbare dress, borrowing and begging through the round of every man's acquaintance, which gives to moneyed might the means abundantly of wearying out the right, which so exhausts finances, patience, courage, hope, so overthrows the brain and break the hearts, that there is not an honourable man amongst its practitioners who would not give, who does not often give the warning, suffer any wrong that can be done you, other than come here.